I was in a briefing room with no windows when my phone started vibrating across the metal table. I didn't look at it right away. Phones buzzing during briefings usually mean something minor, an update, a schedule, change, a reminder. I'd already ignored once, but it didn't stop. It kept buzzing short bursts over and over until the officer across from me paused mid-sentence and glanced in my direction. I stepped into the hallway and checked the screen. My sister's name filled it. Deborah didn't call unless something was wrong or she wanted something handled immediately. I answered already annoyed, and she didn't bother with hello. Dad's gone. She said it like she was reading a line she'd practiced. No pause, no emotion, just information delivered and done. I leaned against the wall and stared at a framed safety notice I'd walked past 100 times. I asked what happened. She said it was fast. She said he didn't suffer. She said she was already talking to the funeral home. She said she'd take care of everything. Then she added, "You're not going to make it back in time anyway." She wasn't wrong. I was on active orders tied to a schedule that didn't bend for family emergencies, unless someone was dying in real time. By the time paperwork cleared, by the time flights lined up, it would be over. The service would be done. Decisions would be made. She knew that. She'd always known how the army worked, even if she pretended not to. I told her I'd try. She said there was no need. She said it was handled. The call ended before I could say anything useful. That night, I sat on my bunk and replayed the last conversation I'd had with my father. It hadn't been dramatic. No final speech. No warnings. He'd asked if I was eating enough. He'd complained about the neighbor's dog. He'd said Deborah was helping out more lately, like that was a good thing. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I was used to being the one who wasn't there. I'd been deployed twice, transferred more times than I could count, and home had slowly become a place I visited instead of a place I lived. Deborah stayed. Deborah handled things. Deborah had opinions about everything I didn't see. The army teaches you to live with that kind of distance. You learn to compartmentalize. You learn to trust that things back home will hold together without you. I stayed up late filling out forms and sending emails that went nowhere. I asked about emergency leave. I got polite responses and hard limits. The system worked exactly the way it was designed to. By the time I made it back, the house already looked different. The porch light was on in the middle of the day. The front door had a new lock. Inside, furniture had been moved, not rearranged, replaced. My father's chair was gone. So was the old table he refused to get rid of because it had character. Deborah met me in the kitchen with a tight smile and a list of things she'd already decided. Burial plot, service details, guests. She talked like she was presenting a project she'd finished ahead of schedule. "You should shower," she said. "People will be here soon." I asked where Dad's watch was. She said she'd put it somewhere safe. I asked about his papers. She said the lawyer had them. I asked which lawyer. She said the family one, the one they'd always used. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She didn't ask if I wanted anything changed. She spoke like I was a visitor passing through, not a daughter who'd just lost her father. At the service, people hugged me and said they were sorry I couldn't be there sooner. They said Deborah had been so strong. They said it was good she had someone like that close by. I nodded and thanked them, because that's what you do when you're tired and wearing a uniform you can't take off yet. Afterward, Deborah pulled me aside and told me we'd talk about logistics once things settled. She said it casually, like she was discussing groceries. The next morning, she drove us to an office building downtown. Beige walls, framed diplomas, the kind of place where decisions get made quietly and don't get reversed easily. The lawyer shook my hand and thanked me for my service before sitting down with a stack of folders already opened. He spoke mostly to Deborah. He explained that Dad had signed a temporary power of attorney months earlier when his health started slipping. He said it was common. He said it was practical. He said Deborah had acted within her authority. I asked when I'd been informed. Deborah answered for him and thanked him. "You were busy. We didn't want to distract you." The lawyer slid a document across the table. It listed assets. The house, a small parcel of land. Accounts I recognized and a few I didn't. Deborah's name appeared again and again. Mine didn't. I asked where I fit in. The lawyer cleared his throat. He said the estate plan reflected current circumstances. He said my father understood I had a stable career. He said Deborah had been present during his final months. Deborah watched me closely while he talked. Not with guilt, with curiosity. Like she was trying to see how much I'd push back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I asked questions. I noted dates. I listened to phrases like standard procedure and nothing unusual. When we left, Deborah said, "I know this is hard, but this is what makes sense." She said it like it was obvious, like I should be relieved. Back at the house, I stood in my old room and looked at the wall where my high school trophies used to be. They were gone. In their place was a framed print Deborah must have bought recently. Neutral colors, nothing personal. That's when it settled in. Not anger, not grief. Something flatter, something colder. I'd been gone when it mattered. And while I was doing my job, someone else had been busy deciding what that absence meant. I stood in the driveway with my bag still over my shoulder while Deborah locked the front door from the inside. I heard the click before I saw her turn the deadbolt, a small, unnecessary gesture that somehow said more than any argument could have. When she opened it again, she smiled like nothing had happened and handed me a folded schedule she'd printed out. "Appointments," she said, "so we don't waste time." The first one was already circled in red. Another meeting with the lawyer, less than 24 hours after the funeral. We drove in silence. Deborah adjusted the radio twice, and then gave up settling on a station playing ads for local real estate. She tapped the steering wheel like she was keeping herself calm, not like someone who had just buried her father. The lawyer didn't ask how we were this time. He slid another folder across the table and started talking about timelines. Probate filings, property taxes, maintenance costs. He spoke quickly, efficiently, as if he was trying to stay ahead of questions. I let him finish. Then I asked why the power of attorney had been activated so early. Dad hadn't been declared incompetent. He'd still been paying his bills, still driving himself to appointments. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. He said the document allowed Deborah to act if Dad needed assistance. He said doctor's notes supported that. He said it wasn't unusual. Deborah nodded along, arms crossed, watching me instead of him. I asked to see the notes. The lawyer hesitated just long enough for me to notice. He said he'd provide copies. Later, he said it wasn't urgent. Deborah leaned forward. "This is getting a little intense," she said. "We're all tired." I looked at her and waited. She didn't meet my eyes. The meeting ended with no raised voices and no answers. In the parking lot, Deborah finally spoke. "You always do this," she said. "You come back and start questioning everything." I told her I was asking normal questions. She laughed. "Normal for you, maybe. You're trained to assume something's wrong." That was her favorite move, blaming the army for anything she didn't like about me. It worked on other people. It didn't work on me. Back at the house, I opened my laptop and logged into accounts I hadn't checked in years. Utility bills, bank statements, a shared email address Dad still used because he refused to learn anything new. I wasn't hacking anything. I was just looking at information that had always been there. The dates started to line up in ways I didn't like. Medical appointments followed by large withdrawals. Legal correspondence sent while I was overseas. Messages forwarded to Deborah but never to me. Nothing illegal on its own, nothing dramatic. Just a pattern of decisions made without my knowledge. That evening, Deborah brought up dinner plans like we were on vacation together. She talked about repainting the living room, about renting out the land to make it productive. "You don't have to worry about it," she said. "I'll handle the business side." I asked what she meant by business side. She smiled again. "You know, the things you're not around for." The next morning, I met with a lawyer of my own. Not a family friend, not someone who knew Deborah, someone who listened. He read through the document slowly. He asked about my service record. He asked about dates. He asked where I'd been when each signature was signed. When he finished, he leaned back and said I had options. He said the power of attorney could be challenged. He said intent mattered. He said courts didn't love situations where one sibling controlled access to another. He said it wouldn't be quick. How long, I asked. Months, he said. Possibly longer. I asked how much it would cost. He didn't dodge the question. He gave me a number that made my jaw tighten. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I knew exactly how long it would drag on. He told me I had a strong case. He also told me it would be ugly. That afternoon, Deborah texted asking where I was. I told her I was handling paperwork. She replied with a thumbs up and a reminder about dinner. At the table, she talked about how hard the last few months had been, how she'd barely slept, how much responsibility she'd taken on. She said it loud enough for anyone listening to hear. I let her talk, then she said it, casual, almost kind. You're set, though. The army takes care of you. You don't really need all this. All this meant the house I grew up in. The land Dad worked his whole life to pay off. The savings he'd built slowly, carefully, because he didn't trust the market or anyone else with his money. I asked if she thought Dad would have wanted it this way. She didn't answer right away. When she did, she said Dad knew who was here. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it made a soft clicking sound on every rotation. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was calculating. I thought about the lawyer's timeline, about the money that would be burned just proving a point, about how Deborah would spin every delay into another story, about me being difficult, ungrateful, aggressive. In the Army, you're taught that not every fight is worth engaging head-on. Sometimes the smartest move is letting someone advance too far too fast until they don't have room to maneuver anymore. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to step back. He paused. Step back how I told him I was done pushing. I said I didn't want to contest anything. I said I wanted to cooperate. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. An hour later, Deborah called. I could hear the relief in her voice before she said a word. I knew you'd come around, she said. This doesn't have to be a fight. I told her it wasn't. By the end of the day, new documents were drafted. Clean, efficient, straightforward. They transferred everything she'd wanted without argument or delay. When Deborah reviewed them, she smiled the way people do when they think they've just avoided a problem they were bracing for. She didn't notice how carefully I read every line. I signed the first document standing up the paper balanced against the kitchen counter, while Deborah watched from the other side like she was afraid I might change my mind if she blinked. The pen felt lighter than it should have. No tremor, no hesitation, just ink on paper exactly where it was supposed to go. She exhaled when I finished. Not subtle, not apologetic, relieved. Good, she said. That makes things easier for everyone. The next set of documents arrived by email before noon. I read them on my laptop while Deborah paced behind me pretending to reorganize a drawer that didn't need touching. The language was clean, professional. Clauses nested inside other clauses, each one pointing neatly to the next. On paper, nothing looked wrong. The power of attorney was referenced properly. Dates were consistent. Signatures matched. The transfer of assets followed a logical sequence. Anyone skimming it would assume this was a textbook case of estate management done efficiently under pressure. That was the problem. Real life is messy. This wasn't. I asked Deborah why everything had moved so quickly after Dad's diagnosis. She said doctors warned them time was short. She said decisions had to be made. She said she didn't want chaos later. You know how things get, she added. I just wanted to keep it simple. Simple for her meant controlled. That afternoon, the lawyer called to confirm receipt. He thanked me for being cooperative. He said it made his job easier when families worked together. He said he'd seen these situations turn ugly and was glad this one wouldn't. I asked him a few questions. Neutral ones. Clarifications about filing timelines and notification requirements. He answered confidently like someone who believed the matter was already settled. You're doing the right thing, he said before hanging up. I didn't correct him. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet. I didn't argue when Deborah talked about renovations. I didn't react when she mentioned listing the land. I didn't object when she suggested I take a few of Dad's personal items and leave the rest to be handled. Handled meant absorbed. At night, when the house went quiet, I opened folders on my computer and worked through them one by one. Bank statements first. I highlighted transactions. I checked dates against my deployment records. I cross-referenced emails with calendar entries from the unit I'd been assigned to at the time. Every major decision landed squarely inside periods when I'd been unreachable by design. I wasn't looking for fraud. I was looking for context. Dad's medical records showed fluctuations, not collapse. He'd had bad days, sure, but nothing that justified urgency on that scale. Notes from doctors used words like monitor and adjust, not act immediately. I found emails from Deborah to the lawyer, asking how quickly things could be executed. I found replies emphasizing efficiency, no malice, just momentum. The power of attorney had been activated the same week I'd boarded a transport plane. Coincidence maybe, but coincidence has a pattern if you stare at it long enough. Deborah noticed I was working late and brought me coffee like we were suddenly close again. She sat across from me and asked about my unit, asked if I was staying long, asked if I'd considered transferring somewhere closer to home now that Dad was gone. You don't have to keep running off, she said. Things change. I told her some things don't. She laughed. You sound like a brochure. I smiled back. She took that as agreement. The paperwork kept coming, deeds, account transfers, tax notifications. Each one signed, filed, logged, clean lines, clean hands. At no point did anyone force me to do anything. That was important. Pressure was applied gently socially in the way families do when they don't want to fight, but also don't want to hear no. You don't need this stress. Dad would hate the arguing. You're already taken care of. Every sentence landed with a suggestion underneath it, walk away. So I did. Publicly, I signed the final transfer in the lawyer's office with Deborah sitting beside me, her knee bouncing just enough to give her away. When it was done, she squeezed my hand. "This is for the best," she said. The lawyer nodded. "It really is." When we left, Deborah talked about celebrating, about closing a chapter, about moving forward. She sounded lighter than she had in months. Back at the house, I packed my things. Not dramatically, just efficiently. Clothes, personal items, the watch Dad wore every day that Deborah had finally found. I thanked her for letting me take it. She waved it off. "You should have something." That night, I booked my return flight to base. Before I left, I walked through the house one last time. I didn't linger, I didn't reminisce. I checked rooms like an inspection, not a farewell. I made sure nothing I needed was left behind. Deborah watched from the doorway as I loaded my bag into the car. "You okay?" she asked. I told her I was fine. She hugged me quick and firm the way people do when they think the hard part is over. As I pulled away, she stood in the driveway, already on her phone, already moving on. The flight back was uneventful. I slept for a few hours, then woke up and reviewed my notes again. No emotion attached, just data. When I reported back to my unit, no one asked about my family. They asked about readiness, about timelines, about what needed to be done next. I slipped back into routine without resistance. Late one evening, after the building emptied out and the hum of the ventilation system settled into the background, I opened a new document and started organizing everything I'd collected. Dates on one side, orders on the other. By the time I finished, there was nothing dramatic on the screen. No smoking gun, no single explosive detail, just a quiet realization. Everything Deborah had done was legal, and that meant every consequence would be too. I set the folder down on the desk and slid it away like it might stain anything it touched. The office was quiet in that end-of-day way. Phones off, lights dimmed, only the low buzz of air moving through vents. I leaned back in the chair and let my shoulders drop for the first time all day. My lawyer had been very clear. He'd used phrases like strong position and clear leverage. He'd pointed to dates and explained why timing mattered. He'd drawn neat lines between authority and overreach and told me judges paid attention to that kind of thing. "You don't have to accept this," he'd said. "You shouldn't, actually." I didn't interrupt him. I let him lay it all out step by step the way professionals do when they think logic will carry the day. He talked about motions and filings, about restraining orders that weren't dramatic, just procedural, about slowing everything down until it could be examined properly. He said time was on my side. I looked at the clock while he spoke. Not because I was bored, but because I was measuring something else. Every delay he described came with a cost that wasn't on his spreadsheet. "How long does this get ugly?" I asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said once it started, it didn't really stop until someone broke or ran out of money. He said family cases had a way of pulling everyone, and even people who thought they were staying neutral. I asked him what breaking looked like. He shrugged. "Depends who you ask." When I left his office, I didn't feel defeated. I felt informed. That was the difference. On the drive back, Deborah called. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just said she wanted to make sure I was comfortable with the plan. She said the lawyer told her everything was moving smoothly. She said it was good we were being adults about it. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Dad would want peace. She always brought Dad into it when she needed the conversation to end. I told her I understood. At the house, she'd laid paperwork out neatly on the dining table, each stack clipped and labeled. She'd even put a pen at the top, positioned exactly where my hand would naturally land. "Just formalities," she said, "so we can all move on." I didn't sit down right away. I stood there reading headers and skimming paragraphs, not to understand them, by then I already did, but to see if anything had changed. It hadn't. Deborah watched my face the way people do when they're waiting for confirmation, not approval, relief. I thought about what my lawyer had said, about how easily this could turn into something else, about courtrooms and depositions and stories that never sound the same when someone else tells them. I thought about my unit, about the work waiting for me, about how much energy I was willing to spend proving something everyone involved already knew but would never admit. I picked up the pen. Deborah smiled before the ink even touched the page. She talked while I signed, filling the space like she always did when she was nervous. She joked about how Dad would have hated all the paperwork. She said she was glad we weren't that kind of family. When I finished, she gathered the pages quickly like they might disappear if she didn't. She stacked them, tapped the edges straight, and slid them into a folder she'd clearly prepared in advance. "See," she said, "that wasn't so bad." Later, when we sat in the living room, she relaxed into the couch like someone who'd just cleared a hurdle. She talked about repainting again, about hiring a contractor, about making things nicer now that she could. "You don't mind, right?" she asked. If I make some changes, I told her it was her house. She corrected me. Our house. Well, you know what I mean. I did. That night, my lawyer called to check in. He asked how the meeting went. I told him I'd signed. There was a pause on the line. Not dramatic, just long enough to register. "You're sure?" he asked. I said I was. He didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He just reminded me that once things were finalized, reversing them would be harder. "I know," I said. He asked if I wanted him to step back entirely. "Not yet," I said. "Just don't push." He agreed, but I could hear the confusion in his voice. Lawyers don't love clients who refuse to use leverage. The next few days were a blur of small tasks. Canceling accounts, forwarding mail, updating records. Every item crossed off a list felt like a tiny door closing, not because I was losing something, but because Deborah was gaining certainty. She grew more confident by the day, less careful. She stopped asking my opinion entirely and started informing me of decisions already made. At dinner one night, she mentioned refinancing. She said interest rates were favorable. She said it made sense to free up cash. I asked if she'd talked to the bank yet. She waved her fork dismissively. "I will, they're eager." I asked if the lawyer had mentioned any restrictions. She shrugged. "Everything's in my name now. That's kind of the point." She said it lightly, like it was obvious, like the sentence itself wasn't a line crossed. I nodded and changed the subject. When I flew back to base, the transition felt cleaner than I expected. No loose ends, no unresolved conversations. Deborah texted me updates without prompting, like she wanted me to stay, just close enough to see things moving forward without being involved. At work, my days filled up quickly. Briefings, reports, decisions that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with consequences. It was familiar ground. One evening, I pulled the file my lawyer had given me out of my bag and set it on the desk. I didn't open it. I just sat there, hands flat on the surface, thinking about what it meant to be advised to fight and choosing not to. In the Army, restraint isn't hesitation, it's timing. I didn't walk away because I was tired. I walked away because the shape of the problem was clearer once I stopped pushing against it. By the time Deborah called to tell me the refinancing paperwork was ready, my response was automatic. "Do what you think is best," I said. She laughed. "I always do." I hung up and wrote the date down. Some choices don't look like decisions when you make them. They just look like compliance. The confirmation email came through while I was eating lunch at my desk. Subject line in all caps, cheerful in the way automated messages always are. Documents recorded successfully. I didn't open it right away. I finished my meal, wiped my hands, and then clicked. Everything had gone through, deeds updated, accounts transferred, notifications sent, clean lines of text that left no room for interpretation. Deborah texted a few minutes later. "It's official." Then another. "I knew you'd come around." I replied with a simple thumbs up and put the phone face down. Around me, the office hummed with low conversation and keyboards. Someone laughed down the hall. Nothing in my world had shifted, and that alone told me how much of the fight had been happening somewhere else. Deborah, on the other hand, was fully enjoying the moment. She started posting again. Nothing obvious. A photo of the house from the front yard. A comment about new beginnings. A vague line about family and responsibility. People responded the way people always do when someone frames control as maturity. "Proud of you, you've been through so much." Your dad would be smiling. I didn't correct them. A week later, she called to tell me she'd met with a contractor. She said the kitchen needed updating. She said the floors were original and that was a problem. She said she was thinking about opening up the living room. "I want it to feel like mine," she said. I told her that made sense. She talked for 10 minutes without stopping, listing plans and timelines. She didn't ask if I had any thoughts. She didn't need them anymore. Then she mentioned the refinance again. She said the bank had been very accommodating. She said it felt good to finally have access. I didn't realize how tied up everything was before she said, "It's freeing." I asked what she planned to do with the cash. She laughed. Relax, I'm not blowing it. I'm just making things easier. Easier was a word she liked. It meant faster. It meant fewer people in her way. Back at work, I kept notes, not dramatic ones, just dates and references. When Deborah mentioned a meeting, I wrote it down. When she forwarded something for your records, I saved it. I didn't respond unless necessary. The Army has a way of teaching you to track information without attaching emotion to it. You learn to separate what feels important from what actually is. Deborah sent me a copy of the refinance summary a few days later. Not because she had to, but because she wanted me to see it. The numbers were larger than I expected. Not outrageous, but ambitious. She'd leveraged the house and the land together, bundling them like pieces on a board. Smart, right? She asked. I told her the bank clearly agreed. She didn't notice that I didn't say anything else. At the end of the month, I took leave and went back to town for a weekend. Deborah suggested dinner at a new place she'd been wanting to try. She dressed up more than necessary and talked loudly enough for the server to hear her stories about managing everything on her own. She's military, Deborah said, gesturing toward me with her glass. Very structured. The word wasn't a compliment. The server nodded politely and asked if we were celebrating something. Deborah smiled. Closure, I let her have it. After dinner, we walked past the house. She unlocked the door and stepped inside like someone entering a space they'd already mentally rearranged. She pointed out where walls would come down. She talked about light and flow and value. This place has so much potential, she said. I stood in the entryway and watched her move through rooms that no longer felt like mine. Not because she'd taken them, but because she'd filled them with certainty. She offered me a glass of wine. I declined. You're tense, she said. You can relax now. It's over. Over was another word she liked. It suggested safety. I told her I was fine. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I reviewed everything again. Not because I needed reassurance, but because repetition sharpens perspective. The more I looked, the clearer the shape became. Deborah wasn't hiding anything anymore. She didn't feel the need to. That was the shift. When people think they've won, they stop being careful. The refinance had been quick. Too quick. She'd pushed for speed, waived waiting periods, bundled approvals. The bank had been happy to comply. Banks like momentum. I pulled my service records and lined them up with her timelines. The overlap wasn't subtle. It didn't have to be. The next morning, Deborah texted to say she'd scheduled another meeting with the lawyer. Routine updates, she said. Just making sure everything was tidy. I told her to keep me posted. She sent a smiling emoji, then corrected herself with a joke about me hating those. Back at base, I forwarded a handful of documents to my lawyer with no commentary. Just attachments. He called an hour later. These are finalized, he asked. Yes. And you signed off voluntarily, yes. Another pause. You're aware this locks in a lot of things, he said. I am. He asked if Deborah was planning any further transactions. I think she believes she's finished, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. Over the next few weeks, Deborah grew louder. She complained about taxes. She bragged about renovations. She talked about possibly selling part of the land if the market stayed strong. Timing is everything, she said during one call. You taught me that in a way. I didn't remind her that timing cuts both ways. At work, my days stayed predictable. Reports in the morning, briefings in the afternoon. Decisions that carried weight but didn't require drama. It was grounding. One evening, I received a forwarded email from Deborah. The lawyer had confirmed all documents were in order and that no further action was required on my end. No further action. I saved the message and closed my laptop. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was organized. When Deborah called later to ask if I was proud of how she'd handled everything, I answered honestly. You got what you wanted, I said. She laughed, pleased. Exactly. I wrote the date down and set the pen aside. Winning has a sound to it when someone believes it's permanent. I was halfway through a routine status report when the numbers stopped making sense. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough that my eyes went back to the screen and stayed there a second longer than usual. I minimized the document and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been building on my own time. Dates in one column, locations in another, orders, travel windows, communication blackouts. I didn't label it anything meaningful. If someone glanced over my shoulder, it would have looked like busy work. I sorted by date. The first cluster jumped out immediately. A medical appointment for my father, followed by a consultation with the lawyer, followed by a bank transfer. All within the same week. I checked my calendar from that period. I'd been in transit, commercial flight canceled, rerouted through a base I hated because Nothing there ever worked on time. Phone access limited, email spotty. I highlighted the row and moved on. Another cluster, another appointment, another set of signatures, another quiet week on my end, where my world had been deliberately narrowed to mission-related updates and nothing else. I didn't feel angry. That would have clouded the work. I felt focused. That evening I stayed late. Not because anyone asked me to, but because the building emptied out and I could think without interruption. I pulled my service record and laid it beside the spreadsheet, cross-referencing without rushing. Every major legal action aligned with a period where my availability had been restricted by orders I didn't control. I emailed my lawyer a single question. No explanation, no context. Just a request for clarification on how timing affected consent when one party was on active federal duty. He replied the next morning with a careful answer. He didn't speculate. He didn't overpromise. He referenced statutes and exceptions and said what lawyers say when they don't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily. It mattered. Deborah called around lunchtime. She wanted to tell me about a minor issue with the contractor, something about permits, something about delays. She sounded irritated, not worried. "These people move so slow," she said. "I don't know how you deal with it in your job." I told her patience was part of the training. She laughed. "I don't have that luxury." After the call, I added another note to the spreadsheet. Contractor delay, permit date, bank draw. The pattern tightened. I requested copies of my father's medical notes directly. Not everything, just summaries. The process took time, but it wasn't difficult. No one questioned my right to ask. The notes described fluctuation, fatigue, confusion on some days, clarity on others, nothing suggesting urgency, nothing that required rapid legal intervention. I flagged the language Deborah had used. Needed assistance, declining fast, no time to wait. The doctors hadn't said that. Late one night, Deborah emailed me a scanned copy of a tax notice she didn't understand. She asked if it was normal. She asked if I thought the bank might have made a mistake. I replied that it looked standard and suggested she ask the lawyer. She thanked me and added a line about how helpful it was to have someone structured to check her thinking. I didn't correct her. The next day I requested my deployment logs, official ones, not summaries, detailed records, time-stamped entries showing where I'd been and what my access limitations were during each phase. The admin clerk asked why. I told him it was for personal records. He nodded and processed the request. When the file came through, it was thicker than I expected. Clean, precise, boring in the way official records always are. I added it to the pile. I didn't need to interpret it yet. I just needed it to exist. Deborah started complaining about the lawyer around that time. She said he was being cautious. She said he kept reminding her about compliance and timelines. "He's acting like this is complicated," she said. "It's not." I asked what he was concerned about. She hesitated. "Just formalities. Stuff about disclosures." Disclosures was another word she liked. It meant things she hadn't thought about before. I asked if she wanted me to review anything. "No," she said quickly. "I've got it." She hung up right after, which told me more than the conversation had. I spent the weekend reorganizing everything. Not physically, mentally. I stopped thinking about it as a family situation and started thinking about it as a sequence of actions taken under specific conditions. That shift made all the difference. Deborah hadn't lied outright. She hadn't forged signatures. She hadn't locked me out. She'd worked within the space she believed was available to her. The question wasn't whether what she'd done was allowed. It was whether the circumstances that made it possible had been properly accounted for. On Monday, my lawyer called back with an answer to the question I'd asked days earlier. His tone was different. Still professional, just more deliberate. "Timing matters more than people realize," he said, "especially when federal service is involved." He asked if I'd authorized everything knowingly and without constraint. "I signed," I said. "I wasn't present." There was another pause, longer this time. He asked what I wanted to do. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just organizing." He accepted that without comment. Deborah texted me that evening with a photo of the kitchen mid-demolition. Cabinets gone, dust everywhere. She wrote progress. I responded with, "Looks good." As the week went on, more pieces fell into place without effort. A bank email forwarded by mistake. A calendar invite Deborah forgot to remove me from. A voicemail meant for someone else. None of it was explosive. All of it was useful. I didn't feel like I was digging. I felt like I was standing still while things lined themselves up. On Friday afternoon, my lawyer sent a brief message asking if I was available to talk the following week. No urgency in the wording, no pressure. I replied that I was. When Deborah called that night to complain about rising costs and ask if Dad's old savings account could be tapped to cover the gap, I told her I didn't think that account was meant for that. She scoffed. It's all the same money. I didn't argue. I wrote down the time of the call and what she'd asked. Somewhere between those notes and the silence that followed the work stopped feeling like preparation and started feeling like alignment. I closed the spreadsheet and shut off the light in my office. Not because there was nothing left to do, but because everything that mattered was already visible. I closed the email and didn't respond right away. Deborah had written a long explanation this time, more defensive than usual, full of justifications she hadn't been asked to provide. She said she felt overwhelmed. She said she was doing her best. She said she hoped I understood how much pressure she'd been under. People don't explain themselves like that unless they're trying to convince themselves first. I reread it once, then archived it. Not deleted. Archived. There's a difference. That evening, I pulled out an old notebook I'd kept years ago, back when Dad was still healthy enough to argue about nothing in particular. I hadn't opened it in a long time. Inside were small things. Notes I jotted down during short visits home, things he'd said in passing, complaints about taxes, thoughts about the land, a reminder to review a will he hadn't updated, because lawyers complicate things. It wasn't evidence. It didn't need to be. What mattered was tone. Dad had never talked about rewarding presence or punishing absence. He talked about balance, about not putting everything in one person's hands because that's how people get strange. Deborah had always been strange about money, not greedy in the obvious way. She didn't flaunt, she didn't gamble. She just believed deeply that effort equaled entitlement and that being nearby counted more than anything else. I'd heard her say it before, not to me but about others, about cousins, about neighbors, about people who didn't show up. You don't get credit for intentions, she used to say. Only for being there. She believed that. And belief is a powerful thing when it's wrapped in family language. I called her the next day, not to confront her, to listen. She answered on the second ring, already talking. She launched into a story about the contractor again, about how nothing ever went as planned, about how Dad's house was turning into a money pit. I don't know how he kept up with all this, she said. Honestly, I don't know how anyone could. I asked her how long she thought Dad had been confused before he died. She paused. Just a beat. I don't know, she said. Why, I said I was just curious. I asked if doctors had ever said he couldn't make decisions. She said no. Then she added quickly that confusion came and went, that sometimes he didn't know what day it was, that sometimes he forgot conversations. I asked if she'd ever thought he might want things split evenly. She sighed like I'd asked something unreasonable. You weren't here, she said. You don't know what it was like. I didn't argue. I asked what it had been like. She talked for a while. About appointments, about late nights, about stress, about how everything fell on her, about how she'd had to make calls no one else wanted to make. I earned this, she said finally. I don't feel bad about that. There it was, clean, unfiltered. I told her I understood why she felt that way. She relaxed after that. You could hear it in her voice. The tension eased. She started talking more freely, less guarded. She complained about the lawyer again. She said he was too cautious, too slow, too focused on worst-case scenarios. He keeps bringing up your situation, she said. Like it matters now. I asked what he meant by my situation. She hesitated. Just disclosures, military stuff. He's overthinking it. I let the silence stretch, not to intimidate her, to give her room to keep talking. He says everything's fine, she added quickly. I just don't like how he phrases things. After the call, I wrote down exactly what she'd said word for word. Not because I planned to use it, because clarity matters. At work, I sat through a briefing that had nothing to do with my life outside the base. Charts, projections, risks assessed and mitigated. It reminded me how often people confuse effort with outcome. Deborah had put in effort. That was true. She'd been there. She'd handled logistics. She'd made decisions. What she hadn't done was consider limits. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer again. Not in his office. Over a secure call. I told him I wasn't looking to undo anything. I told him I wanted to understand exposure. He asked whose. Hers, I said. And yours. He didn't laugh. We talked through scenarios calmly, not hypotheticals, possibilities. He explained how certain protections worked when service members were involved, how intent mattered less than circumstance in some cases, how timing could turn a routine process into something else entirely. I didn't interrupt. I took notes. When we finished, he asked me what outcome I wanted. I want it to stop, I said, without a fight. He said that was possible, but only if the other party understood risk. Deborah didn't understand risk. She understood fairness as she defined it. That night, she sent another message. This one shorter. She said the lawyer wanted to schedule a final review. She said it was just to tie everything up. I replied that I was available. She responded immediately. Good, I just want this behind us. Behind us meant out of reach. The review is set for the following week. Video call. Everyone remote, efficient. In the days leading up to it, Deborah grew chatty again. She sent updates about the house, about rising costs, about how she might need to move some money around temporarily. I didn't comment. I didn't advise. I just listened. One evening, she joked that Dad would have been proud of how she handled things. I asked what she thought he'd say about me. She paused longer this time. I think he'd understand, she said. You made your choices. So had she. By the time the calendar reminder popped up for the review, my notes filled a small folder on my desk. Not dramatic, just thorough. I logged in early and waited. The screen showed blank tiles at first. Then names appeared. Deborah, the lawyer, a junior associate I hadn't met. Deborah smiled at the camera, relaxed, confident. This should be quick, she said. We're basically done. I believed her. Just not in the way she meant. I adjusted the camera angle so the light didn't wash out my face and set my notebook just out of frame. The calendar reminder blinked once, then settled. Everyone would log in soon. There was nothing left to add to the folder on my desk, which was exactly how I wanted it. The week leading up to the review had been quiet in the way that only feels calm when you know what's underneath it. I'd stopped cross-checking and started ordering. Not documents, thoughts. What mattered, what didn't, what needed to be said, and what would only invite noise. My lawyer had sent a draft agenda the night before. Routine language, status confirmation, outstanding items. He'd asked if I wanted anything added. I told him no, nothing he'd asked, nothing I'd said. Just make sure it's recorded. He didn't push. I flipped my notebook open and reread the line I'd written at the top of the page. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse anyone of anything. It didn't explain or justify. It simply stated a fact that existed whether anyone acknowledged it or not. I'd tested it a dozen different ways in my head. Shorter, longer, with qualifiers, without them. Every variation did less than the original. One line was enough. Deborah had been unusually pleasant all week. She checked in without asking for anything. She sent a message the morning of the call, reminding me of the time like she was doing me a favor. Should be quick, she wrote. Just formalities. Formalities were her word for anything she didn't want to think about. I logged in a few minutes early. The junior associate appeared first. Muted eyes flicking between screens. Then the lawyer. He greeted me professionally, not warmly. He was careful now. Deborah joined last, smiling, hair-done posture, relaxed. She waved like we were on a family call, not a legal review. Hey, she said. Everyone ready? The lawyer nodded and launched into his opening remarks. He summarized the status. He referenced filings. He confirmed that all transfers had been completed and recorded. Deborah leaned back, arms folded, listening with the satisfaction of someone hearing a checklist being cleared. The lawyer turned to me. Do you have any questions before we close this out? I didn't answer right away. I glanced down at my notebook and then back at the screen. I have one clarification, I said. Deborah's smile didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just a touch. The lawyer nodded. Go ahead. I didn't explain why I was asking. I didn't frame it as a concern. I asked a simple procedural question about acknowledgement of service status at the time certain documents were executed. The junior associate looked down at her notes. The lawyer hesitated, then answered carefully. He said acknowledgements were implied through consent. He said waivers had been signed. He said everything had been handled appropriately. Deborah nodded along, confident again. I thanked him and said I had a statement for the record. The lawyer's posture shifted, not alarmed, just attentive. Deborah's smile faded a degree. What kind of statement, she asked. A factual one, I said. I read the line exactly as I'd written it, no emphasis, no pause for effect. At the time these documents were executed, I was serving on active federal orders under Title 10. I stopped there. No follow-up, no explanation, no argument. The room didn't go silent because of drama. It went silent because of calculation. The lawyer's eyes moved off-screen, probably to a statute, or a checklist he wished he'd looked at earlier. The junior associate froze, hand hovering over her keyboard. Deborah blinked. Once, then again. What does that have to do with anything? She asked too quickly. I didn't answer. The line was on the record. That was enough. The lawyer cleared his throat. Can you confirm the dates of those orders? He asked me. I can provide them, I said. They're already documented. He nodded slowly. We'll need to review that. Deborah leaned forward. Review what? This is done. You said it was done? The lawyer didn't look at her. We need to pause, he said, just to make sure there aren't any issues. There aren't any issues, she said. You said everything was fine. He finally met her eyes. I said everything appeared fine. The difference landed. Deborah laughed short and sharp. This is ridiculous. She signed everything. Yes, the lawyer said, but certain protections can't be waived without specific acknowledgement. I watched Deborah's confidence drain, not all at once, but in small increments. Her shoulders tensed. Her voice rose. You're overthinking this, she said. She agreed. She wanted this. The lawyer didn't respond right away. He was already somewhere else, mentally reviewing exposure, replaying conversations, checking timelines. I need to consult internally, he said. We'll reconvene once we've assessed. Deborah turned to me. You did this on purpose. I met her gaze. I stated a fact. That's the same thing, she snapped. It isn't, I said. Not legally. The lawyer ended the call before it could spiral. Screens went dark one by one. The meeting ended without a closing remark. I sat there for a moment after everyone disconnected, hands still, heart steady. Nothing in my body felt like victory. It felt like alignment, like a piece sliding into the only place it could fit. My lawyer called within minutes. His voice was tight, controlled. You didn't mention you were planning to do that, he said. I didn't need to, I replied. He exhaled. They're going to have questions. They already do. He asked if I wanted to push further. No, I said. I just wanted it acknowledged. There was a pause, then a quieter question. Do you understand what that does, dude? I said. That's why I said it. Deborah called next, straight to voicemail. Then again, then a text. What did you just do? I didn't respond. An hour later, another message came through. Longer, defensive. She said the lawyer was checking on something. She said it was probably nothing. She said I didn't need to make things harder than they already were. I saved the messages and closed my phone. By the end of the day, my lawyer emailed to say the firm needed time to review potential implications. He used careful language. He didn't promise outcomes. He didn't speculate. He didn't dismiss it either. I shut down my computer and stepped outside. The air was cool. The sky was clear. Somewhere nearby, a helicopter lifted off and faded into the distance. I hadn't argued. I hadn't accused. I hadn't demanded anything. I just placed one line where it belonged and let gravity do the rest. The first message came from the junior associate. It wasn't addressed to me directly. It was forwarded by my lawyer with a short note. They're reviewing. No punctuation, no reassurance, just information. 10 minutes later, Deborah called again. This time I answered. What did you say to them? She asked. I read a statement, I said. You knew what it would do. I knew what it was. That's not an answer. It is, I said. Just not the one you want. She started talking fast the way she did when control slipped. She said the lawyer was making it bigger than it needed to be. She said the bank had already approved everything. She said people signed documents while deployed all the time. I asked who told her that. She hesitated. It's common sense. Common sense isn't a statute, I said. There was a long exhale on the line. Then her tone shifted, softer, almost reasonable. You could have just said something earlier, she said. You didn't have to do it like this. I did say something earlier, I replied. I asked questions. She laughed without humor. You always do that thing where you pretend you're just curious. I didn't correct her. An hour later, my lawyer called back. He didn't waste time. They're concerned, he said. Enough to slow everything. About what specifically? Exposure, he said. Not just on the transfers. On subsequent actions. I pictured the refinance paperwork, the quick approvals, the money already moving. He continued. They're trying to determine whether consent was valid given the timing and your service status. I asked what that meant in plain terms. It means the assumption that everything is settled no longer holds, he said. Deborah texted again while we were on the call. He's asking questions now. This is ridiculous. My lawyer asked if Deborah had been advised to proceed with additional transactions after the transfers. Yes, I said. She did. He sighed. That complicates it. I told him I wasn't interested in dragging anyone through court. I told him I wasn't filing anything. I told him I just wanted accuracy. Accuracy has consequences, he said. Deborah called again, and this time I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was shorter, less anger, more confusion. They're saying something about federal protections, she said. I don't understand why this is even coming up. I listened to it once and archived it with the others. By the next morning, the lawyer's firm had requested documentation, official records, dates, confirmation of my orders. They were no longer casual. I sent what was asked for. Clean files, no commentary. The response came faster than I expected. Not a resolution, but a shift. The tone had changed. Words like review turned into assessment. Routine turned into potential issue. Deborah showed up in my inbox with a forwarded email she clearly hadn't meant to share. The subject line read, risk evaluation. Her message underneath was short. Can you call me? I waited until the end of the day. She picked up on the first ring. They're talking about freezing things, she said. That can't be right. Freezing what I asked. Accounts, decisions, until they figure this out. I asked if the lawyer explained why. She snapped. Because of you. I let the silence sit. They're acting like I did something wrong, she said. I followed their advice. That doesn't mean there's no risk, I said. She lowered her voice. Are you trying to take this back? No, I replied. I'm trying to make sure it's correct. She laughed again, sharper than before. You always hide behind words. I'm not hiding, I said. I'm being precise. That word annoyed her more than anything else. She started bargaining without realizing it. She said maybe we could adjust things. Maybe we could split something differently. Maybe I didn't need to be involved at all. I don't want trouble, she said. I just want this over. Over had stopped meaning what she thought it did. Later that afternoon, my lawyer sent a longer email. He laid out the implications calmly, point by point. He explained how certain protections apply regardless of consent, how waivers require specific language, how timing can invalidate assumptions. He didn't tell me what to do. He asked what outcome I preferred. I want it contained, I wrote back. And clean. He replied that containment required acknowledgement from the other side. Deborah didn't want to acknowledge anything. She wanted reassurance. She called again that night. This time she sounded tired. I didn't mean to push you out, she said. I just needed to handle things. I know, I said. I thought you didn't care. That wasn't true. She swallowed audibly. Then why didn't you fight me? Because you weren't listening, I said. You still aren't. There was a long pause. Not angry, not defensive. Just quiet. They're saying we need another meeting, she said finally, with everyone. That makes sense, I replied. She asked if I was going to say anything else. I'll answer questions, I said. She didn't like that answer, but she accepted it. The next morning, the calendar invite arrived. Another video call. More people this time. Senior partners, a compliance officer, no casual language. Deborah forwarded it with a message. Please don't make this worse. I didn't respond. When the meeting started, the tone was entirely different. No small talk, no assumption of closure. The lawyer outlined concerns and referenced statutes without apology. He spoke slowly, choosing words that wouldn't need revision later. Deborah interrupted twice and was gently shut down both times. When they turned to me, I didn't repeat the line. I didn't need to. I confirmed my service dates. I confirmed my availability limitations. I confirmed that I'd signed without fully understanding the implications of timing. That last part landed harder than I expected. The lawyer nodded. That's what we needed to clarify. Deborah stared at the screen like it had betrayed her. This is insane, she said. We did everything by the book. The book has more than one chapter, the lawyer replied. By the end of the call, nothing had been decided, but everything had shifted. The certainty Deborah had carried for weeks was gone. In its place was something heavier. Afterward, my lawyer called to say they'd be revisiting recommendations. They're exposed, he said. They know it now. I asked what that meant for me. It means you have leverage, he replied. I don't want leverage, I said. I want resolution. He was quiet for a moment. Those aren't always separate. Deborah didn't call again that day. She sent one message instead. We need to talk about options. I saved it and closed my laptop. The room around me felt exactly the same as it had that morning. Same desk, same light, same quiet. The difference was that nothing in it was pretending anymore. The options arrived in an email labeled Proposed Paths Forward. No greeting, no soft language, just 3 bullet points written by someone who'd stopped pretending this was a family matter. I read them once, then again more slowly. Each option came with trade-offs. None of them included Deborah getting exactly what she thought she'd secured. That was the constant. My lawyer called a few minutes later. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked which path I wanted to explore. Walk me through the cleanest one, I said. He explained it without embellishment. Assets could be restructured into a trust reflecting original intent. Certain transactions would be unwound not because of wrongdoing, but because of timing. Deborah could retain operational control in limited areas, but oversight would be formal. Disclosures would be documented. Exposure would be contained. And the other options, I asked. More aggressive, he said. More risk, more noise. I told him I wasn't interested in noise. That's not always up to you, he replied. Deborah called before I could respond. Her voice was tight, controlled in a way that told me she'd already rehearsed what she wanted to say. They're giving me ultimatums, she said. This isn't fair. They're giving you choices, I said, because you said something you didn't have to. I stated a fact, I said. They reacted to it. She laughed brittle. You always do this. You act like you're above it. I'm not above it, I said. I'm outside it. That's worse, she snapped. You let things happen and then pretend it's not your fault. I didn't argue with that. Blame wasn't the point. She told me the lawyer said the refinance complicated everything. She told me the bank was asking questions. She told me contractors were waiting for payments that might be delayed. They're freezing accounts, she said. Do you know what that does? Yes, I said. It slows decisions. It ruins plans. Plans built on assumptions, I replied. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped. What do you want? I didn't answer right away. Not because I was calculating, but because the answer was simpler than she expected. I want this handled correctly, I said. And I want it to stop. She exhaled sharply. Stop how? Without court, I said. Without public filings, she scoffed. So you do want something. I want accuracy, I said. Everything else follows. The next meeting included more faces. Senior partners, a compliance officer, someone from the bank. No one smiled. The tone was procedural, not accusatory. They laid out the situation plainly. Protections triggered by service status. The impact of timing. The implications for subsequent transactions. No one said the word illegal. They didn't need to. Deborah tried to interrupt. She was thanked for her input and redirected. When it was my turn, I didn't repeat the line. I didn't add anything. I confirmed dates. I confirmed availability. I confirmed that I hadn't sought advantage. The compliance officer nodded. That's consistent. Deborah looked at me like I'd just spoken another language. They proposed the trust structure again. They explained how it would resolve exposure while honoring intent. They explained oversight and reporting requirements. They explained why it protected everyone involved. Deborah objected to the word oversight. It makes it sound like I did something wrong, she said. It makes it sound like we're being careful, the lawyer replied. Careful wasn't what Deborah wanted. She wanted final. The bank representative explained that certain funds would remain restricted until documentation was complete. Contractors would be notified. Timelines would be adjusted. Deborah's jaw tightened. This is punishing me. No, the compliance officer said. This is correcting assumptions. When the meeting ended, nothing had been signed, but the direction was set. The path forward was narrow and clearly marked. My lawyer called afterward. They'll push back, he said. But their leverage is gone. What about mine? I asked. You have it, he said. Whether you use it or not. Deborah called later that night. No anger this time, just exhaustion. I didn't think it would turn into this, she said. I know, I replied. She asked if I'd planned it from the beginning. No, I said. I planned to let you decide. That's cruel, she said quietly. It's neutral, I replied. You chose speed. She went quiet. Then if I agree to the trust, does this end? It ends the uncertainty, I said. It doesn't rewrite what happened. She swallowed. Will you drop everything else? There isn't anything else, I said. I haven't filed anything. She laughed once weak. That's the worst part. Over the next few days, documents moved back and forth. Language softened. Edges were sanded down. The trust was drafted to mirror what Dad had talked about, not what Deborah had assumed. Deborah reviewed every line this time slowly. She asked questions she hadn't asked before. She argued about percentages and timelines, but not authority. That fight was over. When she sent the signed acknowledgement, her message was brief. I hope this is enough. I didn't respond with reassurance. I forwarded it to my lawyer and returned to work. The bank released limited funds. Contractors adjusted schedules. The house sat half-finished, waiting for clarity. It looked like progress paused mid-step, which felt appropriate. Deborah stopped posting online. She stopped calling to brag. She stopped framing things as victories. Our conversations became transactional, then infrequent. One afternoon, my lawyer called to confirm final filings. He said everything would be recorded by the end of the week. No further exposure, he said. Good, I replied. He asked if I wanted to pursue anything else. Damages, fees, accountability. No, I said. I want quiet. He understood. That evening, I walked back to my quarters as the sun dropped behind the buildings. The air smelled like cut grass and fuel. Somewhere nearby, someone was running laps, counting under their breath. Consequences don't announce themselves. They just arrive and start working. By the time Deborah texted to say the trust was official, I was already focused on something else. I cleared my desk the same way I always did before a long week. Nothing sentimental, nothing unnecessary. Just the basics lined up where I could find them without thinking. Outside, the morning had that sharp, early clarity that made everything feel exact. It was the kind of day where decisions didn't echo. The confirmation came through mid-morning, filings recorded, trust active, restrictions lifted in phases. No surprises buried in the language. My lawyer's note underneath was short. All set. No further action required. I forwarded it to a folder I'd labeled simply Family and closed the app. There was a briefing in 10 minutes and I was already late. At lunch, I checked my phone and saw a message from Deborah. No subject line, no preamble. Just a sentence. The bank released the first tranche. I didn't reply. Later that afternoon, another message arrived. I'm meeting with the contractor to reset the timeline. I didn't reply to that either. Silence wasn't a tactic anymore. It was the default. A few days passed. Work filled the hours the way it always did, decisions with consequences, conversations that didn't require reading between lines. The predictability felt earned. Deborah called on a Friday evening. I answered because I wasn't doing anything else. They finished the paperwork, she said. Everything's in place now. That's good, I said. She waited for something more. When it didn't come, she kept talking. She said the house looked strange, half-finished. She said living in a place that was no longer fully hers felt different than she'd expected. She said she hadn't realized how much momentum had been carrying her until it stopped. I listened without interrupting. I thought once it was done, I'd feel relieved, she said. But it's just quiet. Quiet can be uncomfortable if you're used to winning by noise. She asked how I was doing. Busy, I said. Normal. That figures, she replied with a trace of the old edge. Then it softened. You always land on your feet. I plan, I said. She laughed once, not bitter, not pleased. Just tired. I don't know what Dad would think about all this, she said. I thought about answering that, then didn't. There wasn't anything useful to add. Over the next few weeks, Deborah's messages slowed. When she did reach out, it was about logistics documents that needed signatures, updates required by the trust administrator. She didn't ask for advice anymore. She didn't frame things as achievements. The house settled into its unfinished state. Work resumed slower this time. The land remained untouched, waiting for approvals that no one was rushing. I took leave and drove back through town without telling anyone. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch light was off in the afternoon. The new lock gleamed unused. Deborah wasn't home. I didn't go inside. I stopped by the cemetery instead. No flowers, no ceremony, just the headstone and the quiet. I stood there for a few minutes, hands in my pockets, thinking about how much of this had been decided by timing instead of intent. On the drive back, I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness, not regret, just distance. Back at base, life continued at a pace that didn't accommodate reflection. It didn't need to. There's a relief in systems that don't ask how you feel about outcomes, only whether you can carry them. One evening, my lawyer emailed to ask if I'd received final statements from the trust administrator. I replied that I had, and thanked him for keeping things contained. He wrote back, "You handled that well." I didn't respond to the compliment. Deborah sent a final message a few days later. "I'm listing part of the land. It's time." I read it once and set the phone down. The decision didn't require my input. That was the point. At work, a junior officer asked me how to handle a situation where someone was pushing too fast and ignoring cautions. He wanted a rule, a checklist, something simple. I told him to slow the room down without raising his voice. I told him facts travel further when they're calm. I told him not to confuse silence with surrender. He nodded and wrote it down. That night, I opened the old notebook one last time and tore out a page I didn't need anymore. The rest I left where it was, not as a record, as a reminder that clarity doesn't come from digging forever. Deborah didn't call after that. When holidays came and went, we exchanged brief messages, polite and thin. No arguments, no attempts to reopen anything. The distance stayed where it belonged. The trust sent regular updates. Balanced language, steady numbers, nothing dramatic. Exactly how it should be. On a Saturday morning, I went for a run as the sun came up and thought about how little energy this all took once the noise stopped. No victory laps, no speeches, just decisions landing where they landed. I didn't win because I outmaneuvered anyone. I won because I didn't need to. When people ask how it ended, I don't have a story that fits into a neat sentence. I tell them it resolved. I tell them the paperwork caught up to reality. I tell them everyone got what they insisted on. Most of them don't ask follow-up questions. I shower, change, and head back out the door with the rest of the day lined up. There are reports to finish, calls to make choices that matter more than inheritance ever did. The world doesn't pause for family drama. It moves on. So do I.